Hi there. How you doing? Happy Saturday. I'm starting a little early because I'm hoping that one or two of you showed up early and you'll be able to help me check my setup. Because I'm over in Germany now, and I'm rather than rather than using my usual setup, just from what I could hear coming back at me just now, it sounds like maybe the sound isn't great. Hold on one second. Okay, and I'm going to try a different sound input. I have a fan blowing on me, so it's really nice because it's incredibly hot here. But I'm going to try this and see how that works. So now I'm on my MacBook Pro microphone. I want to see if there's too much wind blowing into it. So I'm just going to check the audio on that and see what it says here. Just listening here. Yeah, it's pretty noisy too. Okay, maybe for the stream I should have no fan. Sorry about that. Okay, we've turned the fan off and I'm checking things now. So this is with my computer microphone. Bear with me. Yeah, that sounds like the best result right there. Okay. Cool. All right. Hopefully you don't have the fan coming back at you too much. All right. So, Stephen, you're saying there's a delay on the audio. Okay. Now, see if I can do anything about that. That's camo, and then we'll try Ecamm, my actual software for the streaming part. Hello, Ecamm, there you are. And mic delay. So, are you saying that the audio is delayed, Stephen? Oh, all good now. Okay, so maybe the audio source was a problem. So yeah, I know that those AirPods Max, they sound really great for listening to music, and of course you get to hear music in Atmos on them and stuff like that. But they don't always do well as a microphone, which is too bad. But anyway, that's the way she goes. So it is Saturday, June 29th, 2024. And I am currently in Dresden, Germany, and hanging out with Yula Milishka. She and I start a tour in a couple of days here in the middle of Europe. And I think we have 6 or 7 shows, and then we're heading over to Canada and doing some stuff together in Alberta and in Ontario and in Nova Scotia. So fun little summer planned now. And also, I have a bunch of other dates that are being booked right now. So I have my guitar weekend in Ontario in the middle of September. I do have one space left, so let me know if you want to come. And leading up to that, I'm going to do a few shows in Ontario. I'm also going to a friend's wedding, so I'm going to hang out for a couple of weeks in Ontario, go to the wedding, do a bunch of shows, and do my guitar weekend. So that'll be fun. And then what else? Then into late September, then I come back and I play in Scotland with Yula, and then we're doing some more shows in Germany. Then I've got a Canadian and US tour starting at the end of October. I'll be doing some solo shows in Alberta in October, it looks like. And then Yula's going to join me and start a tour with me in Revelstoke, British Columbia on November 1st, and that's going to continue through British Columbia for a week or 10 days or something. And then we're going to head down the U.S. coast and play some shows in Washington State and Oregon State and California. So that'll be fun. So who else here? I see Stealth Parrot is here. Blah, blah, blah. Ooh, there aren't a lot of you this week. Okay, I guess a lot of you are going to watch this on replay this week for whatever reason. Maybe I scared you away with, oh no, he's doing more theory. But anyway, whenever you get to see this, it's all good. I wanted to sort of pick up where we left off. And the last few weeks, I know some of this is a bit of review, but it's the kind of thing that you can't really go over enough. I think that it tends to be the kind of thing that a lot of guitar players especially are really weak on. And so I tend to harp on the chord inversions and intervals and stuff like that as much as possible, because that's really integral stuff for us to know as musicians and as guitar players. So what we did so far is a couple of weeks ago we talked a lot about intervals again, and so we talked about how the intervals are numbered from the first note in the scale. Basically that's kind of the reference. So note number 1 to note number 2 is a second, note number 1 to note number 3 is a third, etc. And then last week we talked more about chord inversions, and interval inversions. So when we invert an interval, we turn a small interval into a big interval, and when we invert a middle-sized interval, we sort of get another middle-sized interval. And very quickly looking at that, just as a bit of review from last week, here is the chord inversion stuff that I talked about. So, excuse me. The inversion of, actually a lot of them have disappeared because I had too many overlays. But anyway, last week we talked about, I brought up chord inversions. I meant to do interval inversions. Never mind, just skip all that. So the inversion of a second is a seventh. The inversion of a third is a sixth. The inversion of a fourth is a fifth. And then there's that magic interval in the middle called the tritone, all right? And the inversion of it is another tritone. So interesting stuff. So when you take a second, like a small interval like this, 2 notes that are successive, let's say I'm in open D tuning still from my last lesson. Quickly retune. All right, so when we get small intervals, for example, note number 1 to note number 2 in a scale, so from C to D, that's our smallest interval, but there's one even smaller that we talked about between notes 3 and 4, for example. Okay, so there's the minor second, which is this one, and the major second, which is this one. And then as we go through the scale, we can find versions of both major and minor seconds, all right? So that's all review. Then when you take a second and you invert it, what we're talking about is taking the pitch classes, and instead of making them, say, for example, note number 1 to note number 2, we take note number 1 and we flip it up the octave. And so now we're going from note number 2 to note number 1 in the octave, and we get something like D to C, for example. So here's C to D. Okay, that's a major second, but here's D to C. Okay, I'm doing it very awkwardly here. So that's an example of taking a small interval and turning it into a huge interval. Okay, and in both of those cases with seconds and sevenths, we consider them dissonant, and thirds and sixths are consonant, and then fourths and fifths are consonant and mid-sized. And remember we said that there's no such thing as a minor fourth or a major fourth, no such thing as a major fifth or a minor fifth. But what we have instead, we call them perfect intervals, which just kind of means they're done, they're ready, they're perfect, okay, they are finished, which in sort of the Latin way of looking at that word perfect really means that you don't really need to do anything to them to make them major or minor. They are what they are, you know. They're kind of these amazing intervals that live alone. So here is the fourth, right? And here's the fifth. And as Kerstin always points out, when you live in Germany, you hear the fourth all the time whenever there's a fire, right? So that's a good way to remember a fourth, right? Or I also pointed out the Mexican hat dance last week. Okay, that's another way to remember a fourth. So let's look at it just before we talk about chord inversions and stuff. Let's look at some mnemonics for helping us remember intervals. Okay, so I have a few. I don't have one for every single one, but I have a lot of them. Okay, so with seconds, they're pretty easy to identify. The difference between a major second and a minor second is such that, like, if you think about the beginning of the song from The Sound of Music, do re mi, or do a deer, a female deer. Okay, so what we're doing there is we're talking about the notes in the scale. Do would be note number 1. Okay, it doesn't really matter what key you're in. There's 2 ways of looking at do. I think we talked about this in an earlier lesson, but let's say in France, for example, or in Quebec where I grew up, we learn do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, and we think of those as relating to specific pitches. Do is always the note C, right? And re is always the note D, and mi is always the note E. But in the English-speaking world and in the German-speaking world, we use the letter names more commonly. And when we use solfège, like do, re, mi, we allow the do to move. Okay, so it doesn't always have to be the note C. If you're talking about the key of G, for example, the key with 1 sharp, okay, so G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. So in this case, G would be do, and then re would be A, and mi would be B, etc. as you go through the letter names. So that's the concept of the movable do, all right? So that's a quick review. So if we think about do, re, mi, that first 3 notes in the song, do to re, do, re, okay, that's a major second. And then same thing with re to mi, re, mi. So do, re, mi, those are all examples of major seconds. So there's do, in this case I'm playing in C. Okay, so do is C this time. So do to re is a major second. So C to D, 1 to 2. And then do, re, re, mi, from re to mi, from 2 to 3 is also a major second. So, and you can see it on the guitar especially if I played all on the same string, right? There's do, there's C. The re is up 2 frets, okay, so you can see the 2 frets. And then from re to mi, again, 2 frets, right? So the major second is 2 frets in the guitar, 2 semitones. Now, if you go from do, re, mi, fa, if you go from re to fa, from 3 to 4, that's a different kind of second. That's the smaller one, that's the minor second. Okay, so there's do, re, mi, so there's mi, there's E, okay, in this case. And here's an F, which is note number 4, which is fa. So if I play mi and fa at the same time, 3 and 4, we get the minor second, okay? So that's very clashy. So if it helps to remember, re to fa, mi to fa is a semitone. 3 to 4 is a semitone. Also, if you're a fan of the old Twilight Zone show, it kind of starts with this weird little melody. Okay, that's an example of a minor second. And minor seconds, remember, they're small and dissonant. In fact, they're more dissonant than major seconds. Okay, so our minor second is our smallest interval. Major second is the second smallest. It's a little less dissonant, a little easier on the ears, okay? But still, we consider it dissonant. It kind of needs something around it to harmonize it. If I'm in tune first. If I play something like that chord, okay, that's a D sus7 chord, and it has the major second in it, but it's harmonized around it with notes that are a 4th away, a 5th away, and it sounds lovely, right? But on its own, it can be a bit strange. Just when you hear those 2 notes together, these are all major seconds. All right. And then thirds of all kinds are what we call consonant. Okay, the major third. Oh, why can't I get my guitar in tune? Major third, Do, re, mi, no problem there. Now, the minor third is the sort of darker sounding third. It's the smaller one, like. But we said we talked about it having, it occurs between notes 3 and 5 in a major scale. So do, re, mi to fa, 3 to 5. That's a minor third. It's 1.5 tones, all right? So for example, there's where it is in a C scale, for example. Note number 3 to note number 5, E to G. And then we talked about fourths. Okay, fourths, again, the Mexican hat dance, the German odd ambulance. Okay, those are the fourth. The fifth is this power chord sound. Okay. We talked about that being sort of like the organum sound from early polyphony. Okay. And that sound, that fifth, is like the building block of chords, and we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, sixths are thirds upside down. Their thirds are inverted. Now, sixths are hard to remember because a minor sixth and a major sixth can be very difficult to delineate, to discern from each other. The major sixth, if it helps, if you know the old English folk song, My Bonnie, or maybe it's a Scottish folk song, My Bonnie lies over the ocean. So the first two notes, da, da, that's a major sixth. So, okay, I was in the wrong key. I guess I actually sang it here. But let's do it in C. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Okay, so the first notes that I played were note number 5 to note number 3 above it. Okay, so beyond the octave. And that's a major sixth. Also, the Beatles song, Two of Us, starts with a major sixth. Okay, a minor sixth sounds an awful lot like a major third. If you think about my tune called Catherine, right? It's the first melody is goes to the A. So the first interval though, da, da. Okay, it's like you're going from note number 3 to the octave, to the 1 up high. 3, 1. That's a minor sixth. Okay, it sounds to me, usually it really does sound like an upside down major third. All right, I don't know if that helps. Anyway, sevenths. The one mnemonic I can think of is for the minor seventh. Okay, there's a couple of different songs that I think about to identify the minor seventh. One of them is the old theme for the original Star Trek show, if you've ever seen that. Okay, so Star Trek, da, 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 da. Okay, it starts like that. That interval, is that specific one I'm playing C to B flat. Okay, that's a minor seventh. Also, the song Josie by Steely Dan. I'm not sure what key it's in. So it's kind of a lower sounding one, right? That's a minor seventh, if that helps. Anyway, it's not quite an octave, okay? But it's also not a major seventh. A major seventh is a little bit bigger. And a major seventh is a much more dissonant interval. So, I don't have a handy dandy mnemonic for the major seventh. So if anybody does, let me know, because I'd love to know an easy way to remember major sevenths. Okay, minor sevenths, Star Trek, and Josie. Yes, Castine, I picked up the ambulance. Hey, Alex, nice to see you. Alex and I had a good private lesson today. All right. So what I wanted to get onto today was how we talk about inversion. Talk about chords, and then let me try that again. We talk about intervals, and then we graduate to chords. Now, before I even get into the chord world, let's talk quickly about, we've done this many moons ago, but let's do it again. Compound intervals, okay? And the concept is simple. A compound interval is simply the same intervals that we've already been talking about, seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, and sevenths, plus an octave, okay? And the way that it works out, the nomenclature, is because there are 7 notes in the scale, once you get beyond the 7th note, like once you get beyond the 7th interval, okay, then we talk about the octave. Now, from C to C, for example, okay, so from, let's say, this C to this C, we've gone through to what would be kind of the 8th note of the scale, although we don't really call it that normally. We call it the octave. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're going up into the upper octave. But we're still starting on note number 1. It's just that everything is double the frequency, so you're hearing it as the higher octave. We don't give it a new letter name, but within the next octave, we start talking about numbers that are the octave. Okay, so you get up to number 8, you know, as the note number 1 again. Okay, so the octave, you can kind of think of it as the octave of 1. So 1 plus 7 gets you another 1. All right, so like the octave, number 8. Then if you think of the next note in the scale, D. Okay, so we already did D in the lower octave, and it was the 2nd. In the upper octave, we add the number 7 to that lower number. Okay, so we get 2 plus 7, you get 9, right? So the 2 note in the scale and its octave compound, okay, they have a similar harmonic role within a scale and within a key, but they're 2 instances of the same pitch class, but they're an octave apart. So here's what I mean. Here's C, here's D. So that's note number 2, all right? If I hop an octave, there's the higher C, and then play that D. Okay, so now that's a bigger interval. It's larger than the octave, right? So here's the octave, my slightly out of tune guitar, and then there's the octave plus a 2nd, okay? So in that case, we call that the 9th. So the 9th is like the 2nd, but an octave higher. So this is why, like for example, when you play a C add 9 chord, you're taking a C chord, which is this, right? And to that, you're adding the 9th, which is the high version of D, that one we just played. And before I go completely insane, give me 2 seconds to get this less painfully out of tune. Thanks, I've got one on my guitar. Eula pulls out her app on her phone, but it's very kind of you, thank you. All right, that's a little closer. Okay, great, so C, and then you add the 9th to it, there's that D up high. So now we're talking about beyond a triad. We're talking about a 3-note chord, the triad, plus another note. In that case, we're adding 9. So that's when you see C add 9. That's literally what it means. It's the triad, the C triad, plus the 9th note. In this case, it's D. All right, and you've seen that in other chords, especially in the cage system, like the A chord. Okay, here's A, or if you play with 3 fingers. Hi, Yuda. Then if you add the 9th to that chord, you get this B note. Okay, so that's the A add 9 chord. Here's the C add 9 chord we just talked about. C major with an added 9th. Okay, so these are 4-note chords. And then D add 9. Okay, so here's D. Its 9th is E, right? Because you have the D scale, and the 2nd note of a D scale is E, and then we play the E, but we play it up the octave. These add 9 chords are beautiful, okay? And then an E chord, there's E, and its 9th is F sharp, which is the 2nd of the E scale. E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp. So I can add the 9th up top like that. There's another chord that you've probably seen as well, this one, which you can also technically call an E add 9, because you've got the E there, and then you're adding this note, the F sharp, which is the octave plus, to the next scale tone. Every breath you take. Yeah, that's right. So that particular chord, you can look at 2 ways. A lot of people call it something like an add 2, just to differentiate it from this. Okay, they call this add 2 sometimes. All right, And then a G as well, you can add the 9 to it pretty easily. It's a G chord, and then its ninth is A. So, oops, I'll finger it properly. Okay, a little bit of a mess, but there it is. And there are other ones that you can play all up and down the neck. Okay, so those are examples of add 9 chords. Now, where did this 9 business come from? It came from the compound interval. So the 9 is the compound of 2. 10 is the compound of 3. So you can talk about parallel tenths, like playing like this, like at the beginning of Blackbird. Those are perfect examples of parallel tenth harmony, because you could play it in parallel thirds. You could play, and that's the same pitch classes, but what I've done, instead of playing the G, for example, in this case, instead of playing G, A, B, G, instead of playing them as bass notes, I've raised them an octave so that they're very close to the melody octave. Okay, so same pitch classes. Oops. You can hear how tenths and thirds are basically the same thing, except there's more distance between them. So thirds and tenths serve the same harmonic purpose. And I use parallel tenth harmony all the time because it sounds so good. It sounds great on piano. It sounds great on guitar. It sounds great in orchestration. When you hear, an entire orchestra playing something. Or think of every second Red Hot Chili Peppers song. All their guitar parts are all parallel tenths. Californication, all of them. Anyway, their guitar player kind of knows one chord voicing or one harmonic movement, and it's all parallel tenths. All right, so tenths are indispensable. We use them on the guitar all the time. And then an 11th is the same thing as the 4th plus an octave. So you can add 11 to chords, and then it gives them a kind of an interesting sound. Like when the chord is as it is, plus it's kind of suspended at the same time. It sounds pretty cool. Like, for example, even this chord. Okay, that's a C chord. When I play this note, I've suspended it. I've kind of added the 4th. Or you can think of the 4th like an 11th, and if you want to. Plus, I've kept the 3rd. I haven't turned that into an F, right? If it were a regular C sus chord, I would probably do something like this. I'd have the F on top. But in this case, I'm adding an 11th to the chord. And it's really beautiful, right? Especially voiced like that, where the 11th and the 3rd are an octave apart. On their own, the major 7th is very strange sounding when you harmonize it. Rat birdie, right? And there's all kinds of voicings like that on the guitar that are really lovely. Okay, so we add 11ths to the chord. A 12th is a 5th plus an octave. We don't talk about them very much because 5ths are kind of a given, right? In any chord voicing, you tend to think about the most essential notes in any chord voicing, and this is really coming from the jazz world as well. But if you play a chord on the guitar, you really want the root, okay? You want its 3rd to be there because you want to hear the modality of the chord. Is it major or minor, right? You want to hear the 7th because the 7th makes a difference to the kind of chord you end up with, right? So if I play a chord like C9, C9 is, and we're going to get to this in a second, C9 is 1, 3, 5, flat 7 or lowered 7th, okay, and the 9th. It's a pentachord. It's a 5-note chord, and sometimes 5-note chords are hard to play in the guitar. Depends on which one it is. C9th is not so bad, but so it ends up that the 5th is kind of the most dispensable chord in the voicing, because you can pretty much live without the 5th because it's there as a very strong harmonic in the root of the chord anyway, right? But in this case, C9th is not so hard to play on the guitar. Oh, sorry. Okay, so a C9th is 1, 3, 5, lowered 7, 9. So 1, 3, 5, playing it high in this case, lowered 7th, which is B flat, and 9, which is D. Okay, so I'm able to get all the notes in that voicing, no problem on the guitar. There are other kinds of chords where the fifth is sometimes hard to also finger as part of everything else, and you want to make sure that you get the root and the third and the seventh in there. So if you have to get rid of a note, get rid of the fifth. All right. And then, so that's 12ths are kind of superfluous, but 13ths are important because, especially in jazz harmony, the 13th chord gets used quite a bit. All right. And it's, for example, notes 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. Kind of played all at once. Now, again, there are notes in here that get to be a little bit throwaway after a while. Again, because you can't play 7 notes on the guitar at the same time, not on a 6 string. But the 13th voicing that we tend to use is something like this. Okay? And so this would be a B flat 13. So normally a B flat 13 would be B flat, D, F, A flat, I'm blanking out, C, and then it would have an E flat in it. No, it wouldn't. It would have, yeah, it would have an E flat and it would have a G in it. Okay, so that's a lot of notes. So what we're doing instead is we're kind of playing a shortcut voicing where we get played the 1 for sure. There's the 3 here. There's the 3rd. There's the 7th. So all the important bits are there. And we're calling it a 13th, which is 6 plus an octave. So that's that note. So that's the all-purpose 13th chord. Okay. Now let's look back a little bit at some of the elements of what I just talked about. And if you have any questions, let me know. 10th frusciante is a term I don't even know. So is that the parallel 10th idea, Alex? Maybe you can let us know. I don't even know that term. But thank you. It sounds really sexy. Okay, so so what I'm going to talk about a little bit now that we've talked about intervals beyond the octave, we can talk a bit more about chord extensions. Okay, and I think there was even something else I wanted to talk about. Chord inversions, chord extensions. No, let's talk about chord extensions first. All right. So chord extensions. So a chord extension, I know we've talked about it once or twice before, but again, let's just go over it because these are important concepts that guitarists should know a lot about. All right. So the basic chords that we use most of the time are triads. All right. So remember we talked about single notes or melody. If you start playing intervals, okay, so 2 notes at once, you're hinting at harmony. Okay. So it is a harmony of 2 notes. All right. So seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, ninths, 13ths, all of those are harmonies, but just of 2 notes, okay, interacting. Then once you get into 3 notes or more, then you start talking about chords. And honestly, a chord can be any 3 notes you want. And it can be as weird as you want. It can be something like, here, I'm just trying to think of how this would sound. Something like this. Those are 3 successive semitones. It's an E, an F, and an F sharp, or an E, an F, and a G flat, whatever you want to call it. And that horrible sounding chord, okay, is a triad, and it's a chord. It's a weird chord, and I learned, I did serial composition when I studied composition, and it's in the 20th century, basically chords like that got given names, numerical names, that had to do with their intervals between the notes. So that was called like I don't know what it was called, like a 1-1 or a 1-1-1 or something like that. It's been a while since I studied that stuff, but in serial composition, very important because that kind of chord voicing got used a lot in the style, when we were sort of breaking away from modality and breaking away from bar lines and breaking away from a whole lot of the rules of Western European art music. So, but that is a chord. It's a hard one to figure out, but it's a chord. John Frusciante, you were joking about the guitar player, and that's very good. We should start calling that, calling parallel 10th harmony that. Then all the people in the know. It could be like a 21st century addition to the terminologies in music theory. Excellent, Alex. Good work. Okay. So any 3 notes can be a chord. Now, what we do normally in sort of more tonal music, that's more harmonic music, is we base our chords, of course, on notes from a scale. And it can be from a major scale or a minor scale. So let's talk about major scales first. So, for example, the note 1, if we build a chord on that, we take note number 1, we skip up a third because of our tertian harmony that we use in Western music. Okay, everything's based on third harmonies because thirds sound nice. So we've decided to stack them up as high as we can. Okay, so 1 and 3 make a nice third. In the major scale, it would be a major third. And then we add note number 5, okay? Because note number 5 is a third above the third note, right? So 1, 3, 5. There's our third sandwich, okay? My favorite expression for how to make a chord. Because third sandwiches describe it really well. It's very hot here, excuse me. So we have note number 1 being the tonic. Note number 5 points back at 1. It kind of reinforces 1, right? And then the note in the middle, that third note, is the yummy stuff in the middle of the sandwich. Okay, it's the jam or the cheese or the peanut butter or whatever it is that gives it its flavor. Okay, is it a minor flavor or a major flavor? So major sandwiches sound happy, they taste happy, and minor sandwiches taste sad. Don't quote me on that, but it's important to remember that minor sandwiches taste sad. All right, so third sandwiches. That's what so the fifths are like the brot, like the top and bottom piece of bread, and the third in the middle gives it the flavor. And of course, we've talked about going through the chords in a scale. We've talked about this a million times. Key of C, 1 is major, 2 is minor, 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished, back to 1. And then in reverse, 1, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you should know that in all the caged keys if you want to play the guitar. That's very important, an important skill, important knowledge set to have at your fingertips at all times. All right, now, when we get into chord extensions, okay, it gets pretty interesting because we continue on with the third sandwich idea. It's just that the sandwiches are getting much thicker at this point, all right? We add more bread to them and more yummy stuff. So the 1, 3, 5 idea for most of the chords works great. And then we can make the chord sound even more colorful by adding the 7th. So in the case of the 1 chord, okay, what we would do is we would take C. Now, with this voicing, what often gets called the zombie chord or the cowboy chord of C, because it's the one that everybody knows in first position. It's also what's called a closed voicing. Okay, the notes are all in scale order. 1, 3, 5, 1, 3. Where there's no gaps. We're not going 1, 5, 3, 5, 1. Nothing like that. It's not that exciting. It's just all in scale order. 1, 3, 5, 1, 3. Okay. There's 2 instances of the 1, the C. There's 2 instances of the 3, which is E, and 1 instance of the G. And most people who teach harmony would say that it's not the best voicing of the C chord because it doubles the third. There's a reason why you don't usually want to double the third. You're usually putting the third down low in the voicing and it doesn't really sing like it should, where you really want the modality of the chord to be established in an upper part of the voicing. So playing the third twice is kind of overkill. It would actually be better if we could just mute that 4th string, kind of like this. It's technically a nicer sounding C chord, right? But this will do in a pinch, all right? It lets you play more of the strings and lets you play with more of your fingers. So since there's 2 instances of the C in there, I can turn one of them into the 7th, okay? Because I want to add the 7th to the chord to make it an extension. So what I'm then doing is I'm doing notes 1, 3, 5, and 7, okay? So, and I can turn this high C into a B just by taking my finger off of it, and it turns it into note number 7 of the scale. Okay, very pretty mid-70s, middle of the road ballad, Olivia Newton-John kind of chord, you know. And then you can go through all of the chords in the scale and add their 7th. Okay, so the 1 is a major 7th chord. It's called that because the 7th is major, not because the chord is major. It's the chord C with its major 7th. If you don't say major before the 7th, it's understood that it's the lowered 7th. It's the minor 7th, all right? So that's how the system works. So C major 7th, C with a major 7th, D minor with a 7th. Okay, this is D minor. There's 2 Ds in there, so I'm taking this one and lowering it to a C. Okay, and this is all notes that are in the C scale. That's why I'm using this particular version of the D minor chord. Right, so it's a D minor 7th. Understood that that 7th means it's a D minor with its lowered 7th, which is C. Okay, D, F, A, C. And then E minor, again, a lot to choose from here. You can play the E minor 7th like this, okay, by adding a D to this string here, because you have 2 B's, you can live without one of them. Or you can turn this E into a D just by, and then you just play with one finger. And there's your E minor 7th, right? F uses a major 7th because F to E is a major 7th. There's a major 7th. Okay, that's F major 7th. Now, the 5 chord is kind of an outlier. It's a major chord, but instead of using a major 7th, it uses the lowered 7th. So you don't get this. Can't use that because that's an F sharp, and F sharp is not in the key of C. You need to use the F natural, which is in the key of C, and that's the chord you end up with, and that is the ugliest 7th voicing on the guitar because it's just not pretty. There's too many thirds, and the 7th is on the top. It's better like this. Oops, it's like this. Much nicer. Or even this. Very pretty. This, not so much. Anyway, but there you have it. It is a G7 voicing. Okay, A minor, its 7 that you find in C is the G natural. So that's an A minor 7th. You can finger it like this by leaving the 3rd string open, or you can finger it like this by playing the G on the high E string. Okay, 1st chord in Rocky Raccoon, right? And then the diminished chord's a bit of a drag. It's a strange chord, and we tend to what we do then is we add the 7th of B. Okay, so it's just a straight 7th. So this is what's called the half diminished chord. Don't worry too much about the terminology, but that's right, half diminished. Okay, that's a horrible name, but that's what it comes to. So going through all the 7th chords: C major 7, 1 is major 7, 2 is minor 7, 3 is minor 7, 4 is major 7, 5 is diminished. 5 is dominant 7. Sorry. 6 is minor 7th. 7th is the half diminished. Now, I said dominant 7th. We've talked about this before, but the 5th note of a scale, okay, in classical terminology, they call it the dominant. And of course, it's dominant for a lot of reasons. It always heads back to 1. It's part of the perfect cadence. 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 5 5 5 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 5 5 5 5 5 5 5 1 5 1. Anyway, the never-ending Mozart cadence. So the 5-1 cadence, there you go. It says it all. But the 5 chord, when you add its 7th, we talked about this before. There's a million different resolutions going on. 5 1 7 1 2 3 4 3 5 5 5 1. Okay, you can hear them all at the same time. That's why the dominant 7th, as it's called, the dominant, meaning 5, with its 7th added to it, is such a killer cadence chord. Okay, it makes the 5 chord even more 5y. All right. Now, let's look a bit more at chord extensions. Okay, and so we talked about these ones already, 7th chords. So examples of that are, again, they're all third sandwiches, right? So you start in an odd number, you just keep going up in odd numbers. 1 3 5 7. That's a 7th chord, and that's what we did. 1 3 5 7 was this one in the key of C. Okay. In the key of D, so we get D, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. The chords would all just be up a tone. So D major 7, E minor 7, F sharp minor 7, G major 7, A 7, B minor 7, C sharp half diminished, back to D major 7. Okay. So those are all the chord extensions in D. You should know them all in caged keys, like I say already. Okay, but here, let's do one more. A. So here's A. 1 is major 7. Okay, that's A major 7. 2 is B minor 7. 3 is C sharp minor 7. 4 is D major 7. 5 is E7. 6 is F sharp minor 7. 7 is F sharp half diminished. Which is, sorry, it's just easier to play it. Wait a second. No, sorry, G sharp. Thank you. G sharp half diminished, which is just easier to play up here. But you can find it. Something. There it is. The low strings back to A major 7. All right. So those pesky diminished chords. So you should know them all in all the caged keys. All right. So those are 7th chords. Then, talking even fancier stuff now, 9th chords. So the 9th chord is the chord extension that goes beyond even the 7th. Again, we're totally talking about third sandwiches all the time. All right. So with a 9th chord, for example, you could play notes 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, it just follows the odd number system. So we talked about C9 already, right? So here's C. We add the lowered 7th, which is the minor 7th, like this. Okay, that gets us the C7 chord. But then we also have to add the 9th. Remember we talked about compound intervals. The 9th is the 2nd plus an octave. So we could play it like this. Okay, if you just want to finger the notes like that. Or if you want to have a fuller all-purpose 9th voicing, like that. But again, we're talking about compound intervals here. We're talking about going beyond the octave. Okay, really important. This is why I come back to it all the time. 9th chords incorporate in intervals that are more than an octave in size. In this case, the 9th. Okay, so we're adding that weird lowered 7th, okay, the Star Trek 7th, and we're adding the 9th. So an octave plus a second, or a second plus an octave, however you want to think of it. All right. Then beyond the 9th chord, things get really interesting. We have 11th chords. Now 11th chords, again, follow the same procedure. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Now, this is where usually you have to start making choices on the guitar. Because I can see, okay, an 11th chord has 6 pitches in it. Now, sometimes certain minor 11th chords are playable on the guitar. 11th chords, because they're major, they have this weird aspect to them. And so I'll try to explain why. So for example, if you play, how would I do this? If you play an E and you try to turn it into an 11th chord, an E 11th. Okay, so you've got E. Okay, the 3rd is G sharp, so you can play it somewhere. There's G sharp, okay. The 5th is B. Now that's the most dispensable chord, note in the chord, but there it is as an open string, just in case. Okay, so there's 1, 3, 5. 7 is the lowered 7th in this case, okay, so there's D, so far I have an E 7th chord. Now the 9th I can find here actually. Okay, so there's an F sharp, so that's not too bad. So I've got an E 9th now, right? Now this is where it gets weird. The 11th is an A, okay? So there's a G sharp already in the chord, and then I'm looking for an A. I could play it up in this octave. These would be a flat 9th apart. It's getting kind of odd, right? So it's playable, okay, but and quite beautiful. But because of the 3rd and then the octave of the 4th, which is the 11th, because they're so close to each other, we often make choices on the guitar to leave the 3rd out. It's one of the rare times you do it. So what you see very often used instead of an 11th chord, a full 11th voicing, is something like this. Like, let's say if I put my finger across the 2nd fret and I just play the top 5 strings. Okay, so this would be a B chord. That's the bass note. Okay, a B7 would sound like this. Right? A B9 would be like this. Now if I add yeah, which is the 11 to that chord, it's going to sound kind of bizarre. So what I do instead is I make a choice. Oh, that's all right. Okay. So what I've done, and this is what guitarists have to do all the time, and piano players do this too with 11th chords, we very often play a voicing that has no 3rd in it. Okay, and it's one of the few times that you'll ever say, oh yeah, the 3rd's not important. Because remember what I already said, root, 3rd, 7th, buddy. But now I'm saying, no, don't worry about it. Now I'm saying, yeah, because it's an 11th chord, we'll make this weird exception where the 11th is very important. The 7th is super important. The 1, oh, you gotta have it, right? But then everything else, okay, you know? So, but I'm keeping the 5th in this voicing. Here it is on the high string. So essentially what we end up with, and I'll try to put your thinking cap on, okay? If you play that chord, that B 11th chord, you got B on the bottom, okay? The 3rd is D. The 5th is F sharp, sorry, it's D sharp. So B, the 3rd is D sharp, the 5th is F sharp. Okay, that's our 1, 3, 5 in B. The 7, the lowered 7th in this case, is A. Okay, so we got B, D sharp, F sharp, A. Then we've got the 9th, which is C sharp. And we've got the 11th, which is E. So when you think about it, the top 3 notes I just mentioned there, notes 7, 9, and 11, were A, C sharp, E. What's that? It's an A triad. So what an 11th chord, a major version of an 11th chord is, it's a triad, in this case a B triad, with the triad of the lowered 7th on top of it. Okay? So you have B major with A major shoved on top. And it sounds a lot like what I was just trying to do here. I go, yeah. It's kind of weird sounding with that E in there, right? So what we do instead is we say, well, how about we just play the A triad and put a B underneath it? And we'll call that our 11th chord. So, but we're still keeping, in this particular voicing, I'm keeping the 5th of the chord as well. So I've still got 1 and 5. I'm just not playing 3, and I'm playing all the other notes. So I'm just leaving 3 out of it. It sounds great, especially just before a 1 chord. So if I play, there's B11 to E. And here's another B11 voicing up here. So what I did there is I played the A chord here. There's the A triad, okay? Basically the upper part of a B11 chord. And there's the bass note, B. And if I play them together, it's a really nice kind of substitution for a B11 chord. You're playing all the notes except the 3rd, basically. And the 5th is kind of expendable. And, you know, if you know my tune, It's Fun Being Lucky. There, it's going to be restricted on YouTube now because I played a copyright piece of music, of my own music. But this pretty chord, it's a major 9th chord. Again, it's a chord extension, but it's not. It's based on the 1, so I'm playing in this case the key of E. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 makes this chord. That's its 3rd sandwich, and then this is like a B11. Okay, where I've played that upper part of the voicing and the B on the bottom. So really beautiful chords, you know, and like super usable and super amazing sounding. And in certain contexts, they sort of immediately take you somewhere. Like when you hear those 2 chords together, to me anyway, it feels like instant, like kind of Motown, late 60s, early 70s kind of changes, you know. They would use those kind of changes all the time, like da-da, on a summer afternoon. It's the Young Rascals, right? These are all 7th chords. So G minor 7, F sharp minor 7, G sharp minor 7. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, they're just great chords to combine. So again, we're getting into the extensions, 9ths, 11ths, super juicy. Now, where it gets even more interesting on the guitar is when you try to play a minor 11th chord. And there's really only a couple that are really achievable on the guitar, but they sound so extra amazing beautiful. And if you want to use them, go nuts, okay? I learned this voicing from a John McLaughlin piece. I wish I could remember which one It was, but I think it's from his album called My Goals Beyond, which came out in like 1972 or something. And it's this beautiful voicing here. Okay, so this is an 11th chord. Now in this particular case, it's a minor 11th. Okay, now the tonic is E, so the root is E. So we're building up the chord the same way, okay, third sandwiches, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, but in minor, okay, E minor. So if we base it on an E minor scale, the scale is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, which in this case is E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E, all right? And if we take the third sandwiches up to 11, 1 is E, 3 is G, 5 is B, 7 is D, 11 is F sharp, and then no, that's not right. I screwed that up. 9 is F sharp. A is 11. Okay, so 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. E, G, B, D, F sharp, A. D, F sharp, A. Ah, that's a D major triad. See? So it's an E minor triad, E, G, B, with a D major triad thrown on top. That's all we're doing. You can really see it on the piano. If you go E, G, B, and then play a D major triad right on top in root position, boink, there's an E minor 11th chord. It's not a very nice chord voicing of an E minor 11th chord, but it's an E minor 11th chord. And if you take those pitches and rearrange them a little bit, you can get something like this. Super gorgeous chord. And the way I'm playing it like a B minor 7th. It looks just like a B minor 7th chord, like that. Except I'm not playing B as the bass note, I'm playing the low E, I'm leaving it open. And I'm raising this F sharp here on the 4th string to a G. And that is my favorite chord in standard tuning on the guitar. I use it as often as I can. If you think of my tunes, No Goodbyes, the bridge goes to this chord. With You in Mind, the first part of the based on this. It's in a different tuning, but it's based on this chord. Anyway, I use them all the time. And so that is an example of getting an 11th chord on 6 strings of the guitar, and you're getting all the notes in the chord. Woohoo! So exciting. All right. And the other thing I wanted to touch on really quickly is inversions of chords. Just like there are inversions of intervals, there are inversions of chords. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of some of these guys off the screen so I can make room so that you'll still be able to see some semblance of me being in the room, and then you'll also see all this other nonsense I'm about to bring up. Okay, so chord inversions, okay? So this is not interval inversions, this is chord inversions. So you can take chords and you can mess with them, and you can revoice them, and they sound really interesting, okay? So a first example is root position. Okay, so you can take something as plain Jane as a major chord, just play it in what's called root position. What that means is the root is on the bottom of the voicing. It's the lowest note that you're hearing. So, excuse me, you have a choice of 1, 3, or 5 to put as your lowest note. Most of the time, we put 1 on the bottom, okay? That's kind of the default setting for our harmonic movement and the way we voice chords, okay, with the root on the bottom. So all of these are root position. Those are all root position. Some of them were fancier chords, but I always played the root on the bottom. Okay, that's very, very straightforward. That's the way we usually voice chords, no problem. All right, now, of course, this being music, there is more than one way to do everything. Okay, so the first inversion is really lovely sounding and can be used really, really effectively as a passing chord. So if I do something like this. So what I did there is I played C in root position. Then I played it in what's called first inversion. So what I did is instead of playing C as my lowest note, I played the third as the lowest note. Okay, the third of the chord in this particular case is E. So instead of playing C on the bottom, like I did in root position, I went to first inversion. And then I went to the F chord in this case. Why did I do that? Because by using that first inversion, I was creating really good voice leading. It's called voice leading in the bass. 1, 3, 4. The 3 is leading to 4 really nicely. Okay? So instead of just playing root position all the time, 1, 4, I can make it more interesting by 1, root position, first inversion, root position of the 4 chord. Okay. Again, I bring up this example a lot, but da 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 da. No, sorry, da 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 da. Okay, that old Police tune. It's just 2 chords. It's just F and G, and eventually, you know, I don't know what key the original song is in. Eventually, we end up at 1. Okay, but leading up to it, instead of just playing 4, 5, 4, 5 over and over again, kind of lose you after a while if that's all that ever happened. Sting being a bass player, of course. He relies on the first inversions the second time around to create this bass line. It goes 4, 5, 6, 7, and it just keeps cycling around that. And you get this illusion like the song is always going up, up, up. Okay, great way of using a first inversion chord. All right, the next the next example, of course, is called second inversion. And so root position is where you put 1 on the bottom. Second inversion is where you put 3 on the bottom, like we just did. And second inversion is where you put the 5th on the bottom. Okay, and so, for example, in C, instead of putting the 3rd on the bottom like we did in first inversion, putting the 5th on the bottom. Okay, that's a very, very common way to go to a cadence. You'll hear some, especially in classical music, especially like if you listen to Mozart, and da 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 da. You know, the 1 chord gets played over 5 just before the 5 chord, because that's a common tone between the two. And so playing that second inversion of the 1 chord, going to the 5 chord, and then eventually playing maybe the 5-7, going back to 1. Very, very strong cadence, okay? But that is an example of using the second inversion. But you hear it all the time, like in country music. Going back and forth between 1 and 5 like that on a C chord or on an A chord or whatever. That's an example of using root position and then second inversion. Although most country musicians might not even know that. There you go. And we can go beyond that, of course. We can talk about third inversions. Now, these are kind of a little bit unusual, but you do hear it sometimes, especially if I do a progression that does something like this. Let's say I'm playing an A, and I decide I want to do this. Ooh, what did I just do? Well, I played A, and then I played A over G. Okay, so basically I kept the A chord, and I changed the bass note from an A to a G. But really what I did was I played an A7th chord. Okay? A7th has a G in it, but I voiced it with that G, that lowered 7th, in the bottom. So I created a nice chord movement there, a nice bass movement. Then I went to the first inversion of the D chord to even make that bass line more evident. Okay, so again, a lot of this we've talked about before, but I like coming back to it because I think it tends to be some of the rudimentary stuff about musicianship and musical understanding that gets lost a lot of the time, and guitarists really need to know it. And by saying need, you can get away without knowing it, but the problem is if you don't know it, you don't know how to use it. And then very often when you do know it and you know how to use it, it can make your music sound better. You know, that's the whole point of this, right? You want to make good sounding music. So that third inversion idea, I mean, you've heard it in songs before, you know, even Sweet Home Alabama. You know, you can think of that, it's D mixolydian, or some people hear it in G. So they think of that as a 5 chord, and then this would be the third inversion with the 7th on the bottom, going to a G chord, right? Because that mode screws people's ears up. Questions? If you have any questions, let me know, because we're going to finish up. It's been a fun hour. I had a lot to blab about, but we covered a lot of ground. Again, some of this is review, but super important review. Okay, and let's continue on from here. We'll talk about some more to do with harmony, etc., next time. Okay, and if you are in Europe, Eula and I have a tour starting this coming week. So check the dates. Check my website, which is donrossonline.com. Eula's is eulamilishka.de. And we have a joint website now, Don Ross and eulamilishka.com. So it's all there. And thanks very much, David. Thanks for being here. Yeah, and I do have one space left for my September guitar weekend, which is happening in Muskoka, Ontario, about 2 hours north of Toronto in a gorgeous setting. So let me know if you'd like to attend if you're in the area, okay? I'm trying to think of any other news. Check the websites, and we'll see you next week. Might not be on Saturday next week. I'll let you know, okay? Talk soon.